It all began one chilly autumn night. The Peterson family, Mark, Sarah, and their teenage daughter Emily, had just settled into their new home on the outskirts of town. The house was perfect, spacious, with a large backyard, and surrounded by tall trees that swayed gently in the breeze. Despite its charm, there was something about it that felt off. On their first night, after unpacking most of their belongings, the family collapsed into bed, exhausted but content. The house was quiet, save for the occasional creak of old floorboards and the whispering wind outside. Everything seemed peaceful until the clock struck 3 a.m. The phone rang. Mark groggily reached for his bedside phone, squinting at the screen. It was an unknown number. His first instinct was to ignore it, but something compelled him to answer. "Hello?" he mumbled, his voice heavy with sleep. For a moment, there was silence. Then a faint whisper came through the line. It was soft, almost too quiet to hear, but distinctly there. "Why did you come here?" Mark sat up, now fully awake. "Who is this?" he demanded, but the line went dead. The next morning, Mark dismissed the call as a prank, though the eerie tone lingered in his mind. He didn't mention it to Sarah or Emily, not wanting to worry them. However, the calls continued. Every night, precisely at 3 a.m., the phone rang. Sometimes there were whispers, sometimes just breathing, and other times, unsettling silence. The messages were vague but unsettling. "You don't belong here. Leave while you can. They're watching." Mark tried blocking the number, but it didn't work. The calls kept coming. Frustrated, he finally told Sarah. "This is ridiculous," she said, trying to stay calm. "It's probably some bored kid messing around. We'll change our number." They changed the number the next day, confident that would end the harassment. But at 3 a.m. the phone rang again. This time, Sarah answered. "Listen, whoever you are, you need to stop calling us." There was a pause, then a chilling response. "You can't run from the past." Sarah froze. Her heart pounded as she gripped the phone tighter. "What do you mean?" But the caller hung up. Now, fear began to creep into their lives. Emily, who had overheard the conversation, asked, "Mum, what's going on? Who's calling us?" "We're not sure, sweetheart," Sarah replied, forcing a smile. "But don't worry, everything will be fine." Despite her reassurance, the family was far from fine. They started noticing other strange occurrences, lights flickering, cold spots in certain rooms, and the unmistakable feeling of being watched. One night, Emily woke up screaming. Mark and Sarah rushed into her room to find her shaking, tears streaming down her face. "There was someone in my room," she sobbed. "A man standing in the corner." Mark checked every inch of the house, but there was no sign of an intruder. Yet the look in Emily's eyes told them she wasn't imagining it. The next day, Mark decided to investigate the house's history. He went to the local library and searched through old records. What he found sent shivers down his spine. Years ago, a family had lived in their house, the Millers. They were a seemingly happy family until tragedy struck. The father, John Miller, became obsessed with the idea that someone was watching them. He claimed to receive strange phone calls, just like the Petersons. His paranoia grew until one night, he snapped. He killed his wife and children before hanging himself in the attic. Mark rushed home and shared his discovery with Sarah. "We have to leave," he said, his voice trembling. "This isn't just a prank. Something is wrong with this house." Sarah nodded, her face pale. "But where would we go? We've spent all our savings on this place. We'll figure it out. I'd rather be broke than lose my family." That night, they packed their bags, planning to leave at first light. But at 3 a.m. the phone rang again. This time, it was on speaker. "You can't escape," the voice said. It was deeper now, more menacing. "You belong to the house." Suddenly, the lights flickered violently. The temperature dropped, and the air grew thick with a suffocating pressure. Emily screamed as the walls seemed to close in around them. "Run!" Mark shouted. They bolted for the front door, but it wouldn't budge. The windows were sealed tight, as if the house itself had come alive. Desperate, Mark grabbed a chair and smashed it against the window. The glass shattered, and they scrambled out into the cold night air. They didn't stop running until they reached their car. Mark sped away without looking back, his hands trembling on the steering wheel. They drove to a motel on the outskirts of town and spent the night there, too terrified to speak. The next morning, they called a real estate agent, determined to sell the house. But when they returned to retrieve their belongings, they found it eerily quiet. There was no sign of the supernatural occurrences from the night before. Cautiously, they stepped inside. The phone sat on the table, silent. Mark picked it up, half expecting it to ring, but nothing happened. Relieved but wary, they gathered their things. Just as they were about to leave, Emily stopped. "Wait," she said, her voice shaking. "Do you hear that?" Everyone froze. In the distance, faint but unmistakable, was the sound of a phone ringing. It wasn't their phone, it was coming from the attic. Mark exchanged a horrified glance with Sarah. "We're leaving, now!" They abandoned everything and ran. As they drove away, Emily whispered, "We'll never escape, will we?" Mark didn't answer. He couldn't. The ringing was still echoing in his mind. He knew they had left the house, but something told him the house hadn't left them. And every night at 3 a.m. the phone rang in his dreams,